in the day when they were thinking of new video games to make, someone looked up into the top shelf of their bedroom closet where all their board games were tucked away and thought, what if we just took those and made them into video games? Then people could play games and not have to go through the hassle of making actual friends. And I gotta say, great idea. However, the NES has its limitations, especially when it comes to artistic games like Pictionary, or when the game's AI is a little too brilliant to overcome. That and more in today's video. Depending on what you want to consider a board game, by my count, there are 9 NES board game video games released in North America. I've already covered Spot, the video game, in a previous video, so that leaves us with 8 that I'll split into 2 more videos. Today we'll be looking at Pictionary, Othello, Monopoly, and Anticipation. Anticipation isn't based on an actual board game, but it is a board game video game. It even touts itself on the box as being Nintendo's first video board game, so I'm counting it. Sometime in the future, part 2 of this video will include the remaining 4, Archon, Battle Chess, the Chess Master, and Battleship. So, let's get going and see what's up.
Word. What is the word?
Moon River?
To the moon, Alan!
Man on the moon!
Everybody trying to guess the word. I said a word.
Volcano!
No
idea. Oh no! Taping! It's a taping!
Nintendo introduces Anticipation. It brings the board game into the video age.
Gotta have
Round inside. No idea.
Donuts! Guess the word.
See?
Games and sets each sold separately. Anticipation. Now you're playing with power. Word power.
Okay, let's play with word power. We'll kick things off with the one outlier, Anticipation, Nintendo's first video board game that's not actually a board game but is presented as a board game anyway. One look at the cover will convince you that this is a must-play and must-own game. If this game can make the rejected cast of friends smile like that, then it's worth every cent it takes to own it, right? Well, yeah, Anticipation is surprisingly decent. Developed by Rare, the same year they developed Jeopardy and Wheel of Fortune for the NES, I guess they just had quiz-type games on the brain. Anticipation lets you play with up to 4 players, and you can share controllers or break out your NES 4 score if you want to show off for company. I'm not sure why there are 8 people on the cover of the box, but I suppose each of the 4 teams could have 2 players on it if you knew 7 other people who really wanted to humor you by playing Anticipation all night. Each team is denoted on the board by a trinket. There is a horn, high heels, a teddy bear, and melted ice cream. Yeah, I don't know. The game consists of 3 levels, and the levels are literal in the sense that once you complete the first, you ascend upward to the next. First one to finish the 3rd and very top level wins. Each level introduces new themes. It's structured a little like Trivial Pursuit in this way. As you can see, there are drawings being made on screen. The good news is that no one has to draw anything. That's the computer's job. Your job is to be the first to guess what the drawing is going to be before your opponent does. Buzz in and spell your answer before the timer runs out. For each level, your goal is to be the first to correctly guess one of each color so you can graduate to the next level, where you'll need to earn the 4 colored cards all over again. Each level has a different difficulty. In the first level, the drawings have dots you can see, so there's a chance you could guess ahead of time if you can mentally connect the dots before the computer does by drawing lines between them. You can also see how many letters long the answer is by observing the blanks at the bottom. In the second level, the dots on the drawing board are removed. Interestingly, if you make it to level 2 and your opponents are still on level 1, you can buzz in and answer their easier cards to advance. You don't have to just get level 2 ones correct. This all makes much more sense when you play the game, of course. Overall, this is pretty fun. Not having to draw anything using the NES controller is a bonus because, as you'll see in Pictionary coming up, that's a nonsense thing to think is a good idea. The biggest drawback here is that the puzzles are repetitive. I played through the game twice, and the second time I was able to guess quite a few answers very early just because I had seen them already in the first time I played. On harder modes, the CPU opponent can guess the correct answer with very little context, like, come on, how could you possibly know that was a shield? Also, when the CPU guesses incorrectly, the game shows you the letters they got right, which has me wondering what on earth the CPU guessed here. The correct answer is harp, and the drawing eventually looks like a harp, but the CPU guessed a 4-letter word ending in P, and got it wrong. Who knows what it could have been? Flop? blap, gwip, peep. Another aspect of this one is there is a counter in the upper right of the screen indicated by a die. Every couple of seconds, the die counts down from 6 to 5 to 4 and so on. Whichever side of the die is showing when you answer correctly is how many spaces you get to move on the board. So if you really need to answer a red card correctly to advance, and you know that a red tile is 3 spaces away from you on the board, you might not want to answer right away, and instead hope that your opponent also doesn't answer until it counts down to 3, and then you answer. Or maybe you want to buzz in and answer as soon as possible to keep your opponent from guessing right and advancing regardless of which color you need. It's a neat strategy wrinkle that elevates this one even more. All in all, anticipation is way better and much more fun than it needs to be, with the drawback of repeating puzzles limiting the enjoyability of playing it multiple times in short order. The non-video game version of Pictionary is great to play with friends and family. It doesn't matter if you can draw or not, the charades-like concept works well. Just draw something, we'll figure it out. I love it. Then there's Pictionary on the NES that comes with the tagline, "The game of video quick draw." And there is nothing quick or even draw about it unless you're trying to use the game to create the world's worst series of Rorschach tests. Drawing is such a tedious chore in this game, especially since playing Pictionary in real life doesn't even require buying the game box. You can just make your own Pictionary game at home and draw things for people to guess. Choosing to draw with the NES controller under a time limit feels like you're trying to describe your emergency to a 911 operator using an Etch-a-Sketch. But thankfully, that's not the default way to play this game, at least not if you're alone. The developers were wise enough to know the drawing aspect would be the hardest part to make fun with such rudimentary technology. If you play the regular game by itself, you play mini-games on a timer to try to uncover as much of a line drawing as possible, and then you guess what it is. One of the mini-games is a weird energy capsule collectathon where you control a little spaceman and touch as many of the capsules as you can. Each capsule you touch unveils a tile of the drawing. Getting hit by anything in these mini-games, choose the timer down faster, meaning you'll have less time to uncover the drawing. The more of the drawing you can see, the more likely you'll guess correctly. You get it. Other minigames include this one, where you have to catch people as they bail out of windows to escape a fire. There's a Space Invaders minigame, and another where you have to carry warehouse crates from one side of the screen to the other without being touched by the flying gremlins. These minigames are not great, but the whole recipe here is not a bad way to handle this concept. You never have to draw, you're only guessing, and if you guess right, you get to roll the die and move some spaces. If you play with multiple human players in this mode, then you will alternate between doing the minigames and drawing. It's worth noting you can play Pictionary with like 1,000 friends. You can play with up to 4 teams, and with as many players as you want on a team, so get the whole neighborhood over for this. But when it's time to draw, no one is going to have fun anymore. Before you draw, you're given a prompt. Your opponents have to close their eyes for this part. After that, you have to draw that thing in the time limit. You can draw straight lines and circles, so yeah, basically an Etch-a-Sketch with time-induced panic. It might even be more fun to spell out the word using the draw mechanic and see if people can guess your scribble than it would be to actually try and draw it. In addition to regular mode, there's alternate mode and drawing practice. Drawing practice is self-explanatory, but doesn't help you become NES Picasso or anything. Alternate mode allows you to play using your own word cards instead of the game's. It's kinda neat that they thought to include a mode like that, but it's just not redeemable since drawing anything coherent is tough for most people. The game has some sense of humor at least. If you don't feel like naming your team, you can press start on the name screen and the game will give you default names like the Empty Heads, Potato Brains, the No Names, and the other ones. All great names for a ska band. And hey, speaking of ska band, I almost forgot to mention that the soundtrack for Pictionary is so much better than it has any business being.
What's this? Othello?
You dare challenge Othello? Defeat me or else! There, you're finished!
Not so fast!
Play acclaimed Othello for the Nintendo Entertainment System.
If you dare!
That commercial might have been over the top for a game like this. Othello is a board game derived from another board game invented in 1883 called Reversi. Reversi? Othello is mostly the same with an altered initial setup of that original game, and was patented as its own game in 1971. In Othello, one player controls the white discs and another player the black discs on an 8x8 board. The point of the game is to trap your opponent's color between two of yours. When you do, you change all of the opponent's colors to your color. After playing this game on the NES, I imagine playing it in real life is a huge pain, having to constantly flip the discs over and over, but the game is definitely fun, at least on the NES it is. You can play 1 or 2 players here, and you start by choosing the color you want to control. I'm not sure about the actual game, but on the NES, the player in control of the black discs gets to go first each time. You can choose the level of difficulty on a scale of 1 to 4, choose a time limit, or you can select no time limit if you're feeling especially adventurous, and then enter your name, which is kind of pointless here, but I always do it anyway. Again, the point of the game is to trap your opponent's colors between yours, thereby converting them to your color. When all the squares have discs on them, the player with the most total discs of their color on the board wins. Some key strategies here are to not let your opponent be the first to get to the edges, and to keep them out of the corners. You also cannot make a move unless you're trapping an opponent, so if you have no trap moves available, the other player gets to go again, meaning the tides can turn quickly if you're not paying attention. I am not a pro at Othello. In fact, I have only managed to win 1 match on level 1, and I can imagine what level 4 has in store. And if you win a match against the computer on level 4, you get to play a match on a hidden level 5 difficulty, which is how most consider this officially beating the game. I am a long, long way from that point. In fact, the box's cover says it best: a minute to learn, a lifetime to master. I find the computer to be a very tough opponent in Othello, but I was able to get noticeably better over time and learn some tricks and no-nos. It's a fun game with a simple concept, and it's the kind of game that can be addictive even when it's kicking your butt. Monopoly hardly needs an introduction. It's one of the most universally recognized board games in existence. It's been licensed in over 100 countries and printed in nearly 40 languages. It's a game that somehow makes economics fun and has convinced several generations of people that they can get out of jail for free by simply having a card. Monopoly as a video game first appeared on every 8-bit computer on Earth in 1985, but didn't arrive on the NES until 1991 when Sculptured Software took a whack at it, making this version of Monopoly one of the latecomers to the console. And maybe that's a good thing, because by that point, games on the NES trended toward higher quality. Aside from being forced to have fun as a landlord, other criticisms people have of Monopoly, the real-life version anyway, is that the game can be very slow, last forever, and many of the pieces go missing. All of those worries can be set aside for this NES version. One of the best things about the game is its speed of play. It might even be too fast for those trying to learn how to play. Of course, the rate of play will be dictated by you and your friends if you play multiplayer, although you can adjust the time limit for each turn to be as low as 15 seconds. And if you have 7 friends trapped with you in your Fallout bunker, I can think of no better way to pass the time. That's right, this game supports up to 8 players, but you can also play solo against up to 7 CPU-controlled players, and Sculptured Software understood that making the game progress at a steady clip was the only way to keep players interested, so it doesn't waste much time showing the CPU opponent's moves and choices. There are some fun animations that add to the experience as well. You can see someone roll the dice onto the board. You can see the Monopoly man get riled up on occasion. The Monopoly pieces animate around the board, and if you build some homes on your properties, an enormous hammer swiftly comes into view to smash a house into existence. Never mind that it's doing the opposite of what a hammer would do to that little house. Just go with it. The game hardly has any personality, nor does it need to, but it does try. If you play against the computer, you can choose from 8 pre-made avatars to square off against. There's Arthur, or Rodney Dangerfield if he were a priest, Gertrude, who looks more like Dustin Hoffman as a British court clerk, Erwin, who looks like a Victorian butcher, Maud, who looked suspiciously like she committed a murder in the library with a candlestick, Carmen, who looks ripe for a San Diego vacation, Isaac, who looks like he writes boring science fiction about space governments, Penelope, who loves a good hat, and Ollie, who is always irritating the skipper and sabotages every chance to get off the island. In all, Monopoly on the NES is a solid option if you like having all the pieces together and not having to deal with hassles like math or taking up an entire day or watching someone flip the table when they have to mortgage their park place. Then I have to recommend it over getting the actual real-life game out, at least for me anyway. of today's 4 games, I think Othello is the most addictive, Monopoly is the most in-depth, Anticipation is the most surprising, albeit short-lived fun time, and Pictionary doesn't need to exist. Of these, Monopoly saw the most releases outside the NES. The sculptured software-developed games include a surprisingly good Game Boy version, and of course 16-bit versions on the Super Nintendo and Sega Genesis. Monopoly is playable on almost everything from the Tiger Game.com to the Google Stadia. Well, that's going to do it for today. As always, never use an Etch-a-Sketch to convey your emergency to a 911 operator, and thanks for watching.